I didn't realize at the time that my words would change everything. I was 11, sitting in the back of my 5th grade classroom, watching the sunlight slant across the dusty window panes, and thinking about nothing in particular, the usual swirl of daydreams about friends, homework, and weekends. It was a Tuesday, the sort of ordinary Tuesday that feels endless until it ends. Our teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, had a habit of asking questions that seemed simple on the surface but somehow cut deeper than you expected. She called on us randomly, often without warning. This day, she asked a question that, for most of the class, would have been trivial. But for me, it wasn't trivial at all. "Does anyone want to share something they did over the weekend?" she said. "Something special, something that made them happy?" A lot of hands went up. Stories about movies, birthday parties, soccer games. And then she looked at me. I hesitated. My hand went up slowly, as if time itself had slowed. Part of me wanted to shrink into my chair and disappear. Part of me wanted someone to hear. I helped my dad at home," I said softly. The classroom quieted a little. Not the usual silence of attention, it was the sort of silence that comes when everyone realizes someone has said something unexpected. "Really?" Mrs. Caldwell asked. "What did you do?" I swallowed and continued. "Well, I do a lot at home. My mom and dad, they fight a lot, and sometimes I have to help my little brother and sister. I make sure they eat, that they don't get hurt. I clean. I help wherever I can." A few kids giggled nervously, not sure if it was a joke. Some frowned. The room shifted in subtle ways, as though the air itself had changed. Mrs. Caldwell didn't laugh. She didn't interrupt. She just said, "Thank you for sharing, honey. That's very responsible of you." Her words, meant as praise, made my chest tighten. Because in that moment, I realized how invisible I'd been. How much of my life had been defined by a silent set of rules that only I seemed to notice: keep the house safe, keep my siblings fed, keep my parents calm. And no one outside the house had ever seen it. But apparently, now someone had. Later that week, Mrs. Caldwell asked to speak with my parents. She said it wasn't a complaint, she didn't know how to phrase it, but she was concerned about the responsibilities I had described in class. About the way I carried a weight no child should bear. I didn't know she had called them until the next day, when my mother arrived at school, face pale and tight, and my father followed behind her, arms folded, jaw clenched. "Is everything okay?" I asked, timidly, the daydreams gone. My mother's eyes flicked to mine, and I could see her trying to maintain control, the same control she always clung to. "Yes," she said, though her voice betrayed tension. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not for long. The conversation with Mrs. Caldwell was a trigger. My parents began arguing more openly at home, and for the first time, I noticed that it wasn't just normal marital tension. It was something deeper, older, rooted in resentments and secrets that had festered for years. I had unwittingly exposed a fault line. One that ran straight through the foundation of their relationship. It started subtly at first. My father's voice would rise over minor things: a spilled drink, a misplaced sock. My mother's replies were sharper, more cutting, as if she was rediscovering grievances she'd buried long ago. And all the while I could feel the classroom incident, my words, echoing in the background. At home, the atmosphere shifted. Meals were quieter, and the silence felt heavy with things left unsaid. My siblings didn't understand why the yelling seemed more urgent now, why tears came faster, why my mother's face seemed perpetually tight. I didn't understand either. I only knew that something had changed. Then came the night that cemented everything. I was trying to read in bed when I heard them arguing in the kitchen. Voices sharp, tense, carrying across the floorboards. "You think the teacher should get involved in everything? Our child's business is private," my father shouted. "Private? She's 11. She's not supposed to be managing this house," my mother fired back. "Do you even see what we're doing to her?" I froze. Every word felt like an earthquake shaking the house apart. "You're overreacting," my father yelled. "Everything's fine. She's fine. You're making this into a crisis." "A crisis?" My mother's voice rose even higher. "Do you hear yourself? Our daughter is carrying a weight she shouldn't even know exists. And you're defending yourself instead of admitting you've failed her." I pressed myself against the wall, listening, heart racing, feeling every syllable like a hammer striking. This was bigger than a normal fight. This was exposing truths that had been hidden, truths I had only hinted at. And the hints had grown into undeniable evidence, at least in my mother's eyes. By the next week, the situation escalated. My parents were no longer speaking civilly in the house. They were seeking counsel, talking to lawyers, and even friends of the family were noticing the tension. I became aware that something monumental was happening. My revelation, my single sentence in a classroom, had set off a chain reaction I could never have predicted. I began to feel a strange mix of guilt and relief. Guilt, because I was the catalyst. Relief, because for the first time, someone outside my home had acknowledged the truth. I started to notice subtle changes at school. Mrs. Caldwell checked in more often. Other teachers asked gentle questions. Social workers began visiting. My parents, meanwhile, seemed increasingly on edge, knowing that the cracks I'd exposed were widening. Weeks turned into months, and the arguments intensified. My parents' friends noticed, neighbors noticed, even extended family noticed. But it wasn't a spectacle for me, it was a slow, grinding process of reality revealing itself. The illusion of a normal, family life I had grown up with was disintegrating, and there was nothing anyone could do to patch it back together. It culminated one night with my parents sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, lawyers present, documents spread out between them. My father's face was tight with frustration. My mother's face was a mixture of grief and determination. "You left her to carry everything," my mother said quietly but with fire. "Do you have any idea what we've done?" "I did what I thought was best," my father replied, voice low but defensive. "I kept the house stable. I kept her safe." "Safe?" My mother's laugh was hollow. "Safe is letting a child play outside in the yard. Safe is feeding her and loving her. Not turning her into a mini-parent so we don't have to deal with our failures." The lawyers intervened, but the words had already landed. This wasn't about legal documents or custody, it was about exposure. A truth that could no longer be hidden, a fracture that could not be repaired with polite conversation. For the first time, I felt seen. Not entirely understood, not yet, but seen. And in that recognition, there was an undeniable power. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't need to. My silence was my testimony. My presence in the room, quiet, composed, watching the unraveling of the world I had always known, it was enough. And in that moment, I realized the extent of what had changed. A simple question from a teacher, an honest answer from me, had done something no one else could. It had revealed truths my parents couldn't hide, truths they couldn't deny, and truths that would forever alter the trajectory of our family. The weeks after that conversation were surreal. My parents were no longer the same people I had always known. My father's anger simmered just beneath the surface, while my mother's guilt and frustration alternated with moments of clarity. The quiet undercurrents in our house had shifted, and everything felt exposed, raw, and uncertain. They no longer argued silently in corners or masked their frustrations behind polite smiles at family dinners. Now, they confronted each other openly, dissecting years of resentment and unresolved conflicts. I watched from my room, sometimes unable to sleep, listening to voices that had once been background noise now cut sharp through the walls. I realized that my words, the ones I had thought insignificant, had acted like a spark dropped into dry tinder. They had ignited something that had been smoldering for years. At school, nothing looked different on the surface. My teachers smiled, asked questions, and gave assignments as usual. But I carried a quiet confidence now, the sense that even small truths could reshape realities. The lesson Mrs. Caldwell had taught me, unintentionally, was powerful. Even a single voice, honest and unafraid, could unravel carefully constructed illusions. At home, my parents' reactions vacillated between attempts at reconciliation and moments of sheer defensiveness. My mother blamed me silently, though she never said it aloud. If I hadn't shared that classroom story, if I had stayed quiet, they might still have maintained their facade. My father alternated between denying the depth of the problems and obsessively trying to fix them. But the fissures were permanent. Nothing could return to exactly how it had been before my words brought everything to light. One afternoon, months later, I sat at the kitchen table watching my mother cry as she tried to explain things to my younger siblings. I understood now what had really happened. The classroom story hadn't caused their marriage to start failing. It had revealed the cracks that were always there. It had accelerated the truth that could no longer remain buried. My words had been the match, but the tinder had been their own choices and failures all along. My father tried to intervene, his voice rising as frustration took over, but the moment was already gone. The dynamic in the house had shifted. My words had given everyone a mirror. Some avoided looking, others couldn't stop staring. And through it all, I noticed a strange sensation, one I had never experienced before: empowerment. For the first time, I saw that my role in the family was not just passive. My voice had power, my perspective mattered. Even at 11, even as a child navigating a world I barely understood, I had changed the course of my family's history. Therapy followed for months, both individually and together. My parents learned to talk about their feelings, their mistakes, and their regrets in ways they hadn't before. Arguments became less about winning and more about understanding, though they never became easy. My siblings, too young to fully grasp the complexity, gradually adapted to the new normal, sensing the tension but also the subtle shift toward accountability. Looking back, I realize how extraordinary it was that such a small, ordinary moment, a question from a teacher, could have such an enormous impact. It was a reminder that life is unpredictable, that even the simplest truths can reshape everything, and that the courage to speak up, even when fear lingers, can alter the trajectory of everyone around you. The final lesson I carry is this: truth is not always comfortable, and honesty can be dangerous in the short term. But in the long term, it's the only thing that can create change. My parents' marriage never returned to what it had been before, but it became something more genuine, grounded in reality rather than illusion. And for me, it was a lesson in agency. Even a child, seemingly powerless, can wield influence through integrity and courage. I will never forget that day in Mrs. Caldwell's classroom, when I spoke a small truth without realizing its consequences. That day changed the course of my family, and in a way, it changed me. It taught me that the smallest voices sometimes carry the heaviest weight, and that bravery is not measured in grand gestures but in the quiet insistence of being honest when no one expects you to be. Even now, years later, I reflect on how one question, one answer, can ripple outward in ways that no one can predict. And I hold that lesson close, knowing that while I cannot control the choices of others, my words and my courage remain my own, and sometimes, they are enough to change everything.